It is 19 hours 30 in Guyana, and it is time to enter room 592 with Dr. Yog Mahadeo alongside his co-host, senior journalist of Kaiser News, Mr. Leonard Gildarie. Good evening, gentlemen.
Well, let me say good evening in the meantime. Good evening, all. You think yoga's fallen asleep?
Hi guys, can you hear me? Seems to be a problem. Um, can you hear me, Leonard?
I'm hearing you just a little sketchy there, a little. Just
Okay, I'm sure you're getting me loud and clear now.
very good. I see,
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to room 592 on this wonderful evening with a wonderful, I think a beautiful weekend awaits us. Why I say beautiful weekend, of course, because the recount, this long 98, 106 days nightmare is about to be over, and we can all become a little bit jubilant because as a Guyanese people, we have withstood all of the challenges of over 100 years by 100 days by the time we are finished. We have withstood all the challenges. We have had arguments between us. We have had fights between us, but we are emerging as a people that will be looking at a result of these elections that should be out within a week from today. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this room 592 where we unleash the truth. And as we start the program tonight, I want to welcome Mr. Nicholas Degu, who comes from the private sector, as does Mr. Gerry Gouveia, who comes from the private sector. Both of these gentlemen, we have asked them to join us in this program today to talk about a few aspects, particularly relating to the elections and particularly relating to the question as to how possible is it for impersonation to happen in these elections? How possible is it or impossible is it for there to be the frauds that we have been hearing about? We'll get to that in a minute. Leonard, my friend, my co-host, as I welcome you for your opening comments, sir, I must make this note to our viewers and listeners out there that one of the persons who have worked in a polling district has come forward with a statement that all of these claims and all of these things being made about polling books and all of these things, she has made a statement to say, not on my watch. I was there and all of these things went through the process and it was handed to the DRO. Leonard, your thoughts, sir?
Well, I'm not sure about that. What I could tell you is that today there was some developments that I was discussing with a couple of the reporters. And today, I think they would have been blocking any observations, or since yesterday, in fact, Rhonda Lamb, TCI presidential candidate, reported that there was a blocking of the observations when she wanted to bring up the Mingo figures. I think today, the chairperson is reported to have taken a decision. I haven't seen a statement on yet, as yet, but she has taken a decision to have the parties who have issues and want to make observations with regards to Mingo figures to have it in a separate or a parallel report. That's what I could tell you at this time.
Thank you, Leonard. And also, we want to note that tonight, I think Mr. Joe Harmon's ultimatum to GCOM would have run out. The clock would have run out on that. I'm not so sure that we got a statement coming out of GCOM. What we do know is Mr. Joe Harmon, and I say this without any disrespect to the gentleman, he is his party's agent, but I must say this, and it is my personal belief, ladies and gentlemen, that Mr. Joe Harmon used two words today. He used the words like one having a disease. He used the words diseased, and he used the words obnoxious. And those were very good adjectives. Those were very good words that anybody can come up, genius words, anybody could have come up with to describe what Mr. Mingo and whoever was the intelligent author behind Mr. Mingo, what they did to hold this country at ransom for over 80 days. And up to now, nobody, and it has to be seen one day the truth will emerge as to the SOPs that have been withheld purposely but not purposively by GCOM. Ladies and gentlemen, as we discuss these elections, more and more as we're getting near to the end, we want to be quelled. We wish we could be quelled into just wait for the results. But we are bombarded every day with allegations of improprieties, allegations of fraud, things that have not been proven but are being called fraud. We are bombarded that these elections seem to be so bad. Thankfully, last night, Leonard, Mr. Vincent Alexander was on this show, and he said that one cannot think of an annulment if there was not a declaration. He also made some very, very incisive and good declarations yesterday that we are still thinking about, and we're looking forward to Mr. Alexander's return early next week. But in the meanwhile, ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome Mr. Nick Degu and Mr. Gerry, Capt.Gerry Gouveia, to this room 592 as we want to discuss. Captain, I want to start with you, sir. Is it a probability or possibility that there could be fraud in these elections, especially as being made out by one of the stakeholders in the process, sir?
Let me say to you that it's impossible. And I'm not saying might be or maybe. I'm saying it is impossible for any political party, whether APNO, AGNO, whoever, PPP, it is impossible for any political party to attempt to interfere or tamper with the electoral process. It is impossible for any one person to vote twice, and it is impossible for any person to vote for somebody else. Now, I'm not saying that lightly, and I know people keep on talking about what happened in the 70s and the 80s, and the electoral systems. They had a lot of reform of those electoral systems in Guyana, and the current system makes it exceptionally impossible for any person, to any political party. Now, I am not saying that if you have compromised staff in GCOM, that they cannot attempt to interfere with the system. They could create confusion. They could lose poll books. They could do things on purpose if they wanted to be. But still, you still have DROs, and you still have the RO, and you still have in any polling station there's 5 staff of GCOM, and then you still have the party agents, and all of them are looking at each other. But the only people who could interfere in the election and attempt to create confusion in the election, because they will get caught, is GCOM staff. So if GCOM staff is compromised in any way, they could create confusion by ticking the wrong names, by misplacing or not putting things how they were trained to do it, and people could do that deliberately if they wanted to create confusion, but not the political parties. The political parties do not have access to the GCOM systems, and they cannot interfere with the thing. I wanted to read something quickly, Yogi, if you'll let me. This is the European Union. The European Union said this today: legal uncertainty, unregulated political finance, biased state media, and lack of transparency in the administration of elections characterize the pre-election context. This is the European Union discussing their observer mission to Guyana. They also went on to say voting and counting were well managed all over the country, as was the tabulation results in 9 of Guyana's 10 regions. They also went on to say, however, the integrity of the entire electoral process was seriously compromised by the non-transparent and non-credible tabulation of results in the largest region, Region 4, by senior GCOM officials acting in blatant violation of the law and High Court orders issued in this regard. End of quote.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Gerry. And indeed, it is very clear. And Gerry, yourself and other members of the local, including Nick, you guys who have been the local observers, you have been looking at I would want to ask you this. Do you think you have been looking at a process where there has been intent intent at the creation of mischief to throw a cloud over this process? Because if at the end of March 2nd, Madam Claudette Singh, Mr. David Granger, Mr. Basil Williams, the British High Commission, every single body, the Carter Center, Commonwealth Mission, all of them said these elections were the best ever, very well held and so forth. All of a sudden, to come 90 odd days later to say these were the most fraudulent elections, something and somebody has to be responsible there.
But let me say to you, I was in the convention center today and I was sitting in one of the counting rooms, and I saw the young man also. Every time the box is open and the count and it's coming to an end, he would put out this list and he would start to call out a whole set of serial numbers. And I mean, it was almost like an irritant what he was doing, because he was kind of like in a fishing expedition. And then I start hearing that all of the boxes that was interfered by Mr. Mingo, all of the boxes that was mingled by Mingo, suddenly all of those boxes, when they open them, they're finding, oh, we don't have the documents, or we don't have this. And then they're being, and then the allegation by the APNU agent is that because they can't find these documents, we can't validate these votes. But then what I was told today in very clear terms is that the deputy RO, and I don't know why that deputy RO would do that, and GCOM needs to investigate it, but said to them, do not put the documents in the box, put it in an envelope and give it to us. Now, I was told that Mr. Loingfield reported that all of the documents are in his possession, are in GCOM's possession. So why would, if that is so, and that is the only place, this East Coast region, seems to be the hub of the PPP stronghold in Region 4, why would that region, why would the deputy ROs tell the presiding officers not to follow the procedure and to put them in envelopes and give it to them personally? I don't know that, and hopefully GCOM will answer that question tomorrow, but I understand the commission is meeting tomorrow to discuss that.
Okay. Nick, you wanted to say something. Your mic is mute.
Yeah. What I would say is that the system is very robust. So, it's very hard to mess with the EDA system. And then we saw what happened when the returning officer of District 4, Mr. Cleobot Mingo, tried to mess with the tabulation end of it. Of course, in any election, and especially given our election, the manual nature of it, you're going to have a few things that are not going exactly to plan. And so what we're witnessing here is the exploitation of a few procedural errors and a party trying to call the procedural errors material fraud. They're not. They're just procedural errors. They're not material or significant in the context of the totality of the election.
Okay. And Gerry, I want to come back to you on the same point, because obviously this now becomes the new narrative that is, bombarding everybody's brain space. GCOM has made a decision midway in the process. In other words, whatever was happening up to yesterday, is it true that as of today now, they have made a decision that is different from the counts that would have happened yesterday by saying, now take these boxes and put it aside? Is it that there is a difference in today's count as compared to yesterday, or procedure of count? You're muted. Unmute your mic. Sorry. Yes, thanks.
Yeah, sorry, you hear me now?
Yes.
Right, it's not the count. The count of the box is completed. When the statement of recount goes to the tabulation center, those SORs are accompanied with this observation report. Mm-hmm. And this observation report is where the APNU agent, as one party in the room, is making the claim that these votes, this is invalid. They cannot validate this. But that's their opinion. That's one party. But GCOM this afternoon, not for the whole of today, they said that they're going to suspend the tabulation. They're going to suspend the tabulation of the boxes where the APNU agents put that they cannot validate the vote. And they're going to take that decision to the commission tomorrow. So the commission will meet to discuss it. Why is it that they're writing that terminology of invalidation? And so tomorrow we hope to get that resolved. And from the information we have is that the documents that was not in the box are in the possession of GCOM, and hopefully they will have that matter resolved tomorrow. Go ahead. Sorry, Nick.
No, you had wanted to continue saying something?
Yeah. Sorry, my phone just fell off my stand.
Okay.
No, but I'm good. But I was saying that where am I here? Oh my God. I was saying that are you guys hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Right.
Okay.
The OAS,
yes.
In the OAS statement, it said that despite some inconsistencies in the electoral material reviewed during the recount, as is normal the case in any electoral process, the OAS mission has no reason to doubt that the results emanating from the recount will be credible. A declaration based on these results would lead to the installation of a legitimate government. Now, the OAS, they observe elections all over the world. They are the expert. They're the gold standard. And they're saying that when you do a recount, like Nick made the point, you are going to find elements of human error. Let me give you an example today. Today, I'm sitting in the room and at one polling with one box. And the box had 300 and maybe 30 votes on the OLE for that box. And 246 votes went to APNU. So they were counting the 246. And in the count of the 246, one of the votes turned out to be Agno. So Agno, Greg, sorry. And but they counting again, and then another vote in that pile turned out to be a PPP vote. Nobody screamed, nobody accused them of fraud, of trying to maybe put 2 votes into there to make it 246 rather than 244. We understand it to be a human error. I mean, it was a clear case today where in the pile, in the envelope of the APNU votes, was a vote for ANAG and there was a vote for the PPP. But I believe it happened by accident. But it was a human error. But every time you have a human error happen, you're screaming fraud. But GCOM, and this is an indictment on GCOM. This is an indictment on Loingfield, who is the manager, the man who set up these systems and trained his staff. So this is an indictment. When people ridicule the GCOM system, they're not ridiculing the PPP or AGNU or TCI. They're ridiculing GCOM. They're saying the GCOM run the most sloppy. They spent $8 billion and give us the most sloppy elections in the history of Guyana, which is ridiculous.
Well, I wanted to come back on that same question, because every decision that GCOM makes is an indictment on GCOM, nobody else. I mean, every decision they make, whatever way they make that decision, is a shot or being taken in their own feet, isn't it?
Nick? Absolutely. And let me tell you, Loingfield is, I mean, when you look at this recount at the convention center, it is world class, Yog. This is managed by Keith Loingfield. I mean, Keith Loingfield demonstrated a tremendous level of understanding of logistics and planning, project management, of setting up this system at the convention center that is world class. It is transparent. It is credible.
Right.
It is smooth. The staff is courteous. And for you to say that a man who set this up and also set up an election day process that every international agency, every single international agency certified as fair and free, to tell me now that they've done nonsense where no, I can't accept that. That is
Right.
That is not acceptable.
But let me just say this to our viewers and listeners. We said it today during the elections watch, and I wish to repeat it here. Look, there are two types of materials that are gathered on a polling day. They're the sensitive ones, like the ballots. They're the sensitive ones, like the SOPs, like the lists, the ink. And they're the not so sensitive ones, like the signs, the documents, the poll books, the envelopes, and so forth. The sensitive materials ought to have been placed in the box. The non-sensitive materials ought to have been placed in a poll bag. What we have found that has happened throughout these 94 days would have been a recognition that some of the non-sensitive materials ended up in the box and vice versa. Some of the sensitive materials ended up in the poll book. However, what I'm told, Nick, and this goes to you, the box and the bag are both then returned to the RO, and eventually, going back to what Gerry said, the CEO is in possession of all of these so-called missing stuff, because everything, whether it is in the bag or it's in the box, it goes into the possession of GCOM, into the possession of the commission and the secretariat. Nick, your thoughts?
So what you described is correct to my understanding as well, that the commission is in possession of all these materials that are being deemed as missing, which is why, as observers, we are concerned about the language that is being used in some of these observation reports, as well as some of the press releases we see coming from the parties, because things are being missing, but they're not really missing as you premised. They're in possession. They're in GCOM's possession. It's just a question of who in GCOM's possession it went to, whether the materials were packed away in the box that night or they were sent in the poll bag, which goes to the CEO's office.
But Nick, let me interject a little bit to both you and Gerry. But let's take a step back, sirs. 80 days ago, 70 days ago, the SOPs were in GCOM's hands, were in Lowenfield's possession. They did not, and still are, and they did not use those SOPs to correct what Madam Chief Justice Roxanne George agreed was a fraud, was a breach of 84-2. Nobody stood up and said that was wrong. And what do we, the Guyanese public, have in our hands now, Gerry, to say that the same GCOM that allowed Mingo to do what he did will not now allow Mr. Mingo version 2 or Miss Mingoette version 3 to now derail the process here on?
Well, let's separate out a couple of ideas, right? Because the fraud that we were talking about that was perpetrated in these elections happened when Claremont Mingo began tabulating the District 4 results using a spreadsheet with figures that did not match the SOPs that each party got a copy of. GCOM's SOPs that each party has a copy of. What is being touted now is these procedural errors. Let's look at what, like, for instance, today we saw a lot of the official list of electors not being in the boxes, right? Now, the thing is that is a good system in order to check and see who came into the polling station that day and to mark off or do a roll call. But it's not, if that bit of data is missing at the count, it's not going to stop or invalidate the votes in the box. And similarly, that OLE is in somebody's possession. So somebody in GCOM has it. That's not a material fraud because that's not an attempt to change the votes in the box, per se.
But my question is, what assurance we have that somebody in GCOM will say, I don't know about it and we do not have it, and therefore let all those boxes be invalidated. What
Well,
assurances? Yeah, go on.
let me add one thing, and I'll get to the point you make it. So there's also the thing that you can make is, well, you know, the OLE is missing and somebody stuffed the ballot box. No, because you had a party agent there that night who witnessed the count, who signed off on the SOP, right? So nobody stuffed the ballot box, because if somebody stuffed the ballot box that night, you would have seen a big fuss made. The party agents would have called back into party headquarters, and whoever was the party not being benefited by the stuff in the box, they would have had people out there and they would have called the police and the GCOM commission. Now, getting to what you're saying is that.
But hold a minute. Sorry to get into your train of thoughts. But I'll want you to know, about 2 days ago, one of the APNO AFC officials would have been on one of our programs, and he said that maybe some of their own agents came under the influence of somebody. They literally threw their agents under the bus. Leonard was there, and I that was my reaction. I said, are you throwing your agents under the bus? And he said, well, not really, but we cannot at this stage stand for everybody's character. And they believe that some of these people might have now been under questionable circumstances. And 2 weeks ago, Mr. Alexander also made those assertions about the GCOM staff.
Remember, so not factoring in the new parties, it's 3 groups of personnel there at the polling station, 4 if you include the police, right? So you have the GCOM personnel who are carrying out the election. You are having agents from the governing party, agents from the major opposition party. You have police officers, and then you also have local and international observers who may be roving.
Nick,
or some
don't forget the small parties.
Yep. And so if you're going to stuff the box, you have to get all of those people to agree. You know, I mean, and you had to have known who everybody was, ahead of time, who's going to be at that station. So it's very hard to get that type of collusion.
Nick, I did ask, Leonard is there. I did ask, are you saying that 10,000 people were potentially bribed by somebody, knowing who is going to be where? And the answer was not forthcoming that it was a no. The answer was saying they can't swear for these people. I even went further. I asked 2 persons. I said, are you saying that the policemen also are under suspicion then? And the answer given to me was the policeman doesn't keep anybody out and are not involved in these elections. And I corrected them that the policemen were there and doing a job. But the point is that some people are making it out to be that all of these people were influenced in one way or another, financially or in some other way, to close their eyes when ghosts and zombies and people walked into the polling station to vote.
You know, as observers, we were called in to investigate all sorts of incidents. For instance, the famous one was Nandalal was sharing out ID cards so that people could go and vote multiple times on the West Bank. These things there was no incident that when, as observers, we received a bit of information and checked it out, we found that it lived up to what it was originally billed as, asking for us to go and check it out. Nothing of the sort. The system is very robust. It can be improved, of course, but it's robust enough, and that's what's playing out here.
Gerry, over the past week or 2 or 3, a lot of Guyanese have become almost convinced that these elections were the worst ever in Guyana's history, and there is huge numbers of fraud. Given the question that Nick just explained, he just explained, and given the following, it also meant if all these allegations are there, and I want to remind viewers, they are allegations. There has not been one proof as yet there has all been allegations. Gerry, if all these allegations are made out, it means somebody agreed to tick off people. It means somebody this fraud was foreseen and planned 5 years ago, as one of them said. Gerry, what assurances are you, Gerry Gouveia, feeling any degree of comfort that GCOM will make the right decision going forward towards the end of this election so that all the ballots will be counted?
I am going to say this, and I know that some people, even a lot of my own colleagues in the private sector, sometimes turn their nose up at me when I say this. I actually do have confidence that the chairperson of GCOM will do the right thing. I actually believe, and I don't subscribe to this narrative that this was the worst elections in the history of Guyana. Actually, this is probably one of the best elections in the history of Guyana, with the exception of what happened in the Region 4 office. These elections were well run. They were professional. They were clean. The staff was well trained. They were courteous. And, you know, as an observer, I was not, and I made the point over and over, I was not confined to Georgetown. I actually that day went to 6 regions or 5 regions, I believe it was. I went and I looked at all the polling stations on the Essequibo Coast, in Bartica, in Linden, in the Quarantine, in Berbice. And it was one standard. It was like going to a McDonald's. Wherever you go to a McDonald's or a Kentucky or anywhere in the world, the standard of food is the same, the standard of service is the same, and the standard of these elections, everywhere we went, the staff was courteous, they were well trained, they were efficient, and the elections were run very, very well, except for when we came to that tabulation of Region 4. It was the most ridiculous, transparent attempt at stealing an election probably in the history of the world. It was so childish and juvenile and foolish. It is equivalent to 34 being debated against 33 as the majority of 65. That is how juvenile and foolish it was. And so these elections were actually very well run. And just to come back to the first question was, I want to tell you, I actually believe that the chairperson really got a task of looking at all of the stakeholders in these elections. And I think she cannot ignore any information that is coming to her. We would like her to ignore what we believe is just foolish information. But you know, the chairperson got to take everybody's views into consideration. But I actually believe that this woman is a member of the judiciary, or used to be. I think that she's an officer of the court. I think she is a woman of high integrity, and I believe that she will do the right thing according to the rule of law when this is over. I actually am very, very optimistic about it.
Well, Gerry, I'll tell you this, both Mr. Gildarie and myself on radio during the day, we were questioned by a caller a couple of days ago as to why Madam Claudette Singh would have sought to seek evidence out herself. And our response was that, to give her credit, she wants to be educated to make a decision. Nothing is wrong with her seeking clarity, or, you know, as a person that is head of a board, you want everybody to hit you with all the information possible so that you could make, because ultimately, viewers and listeners, there are 3 persons that are going to vote according to the APNU AFC's heartbeat, and there are 3 persons that are going to vote according to the PPPC's. There is only 1 person that currently should and ought to, and we are sure will be voting according to the heartbeat of Guyana, and that is the chairman of GCOM. She has to take a non-partisan view, a view for which she was selected as a legal person that has all the laws in her hand, and make that thing. So, Gerry, coming back to this thing about, before I hand you over to Leonard, coming back to this thing about her decision or not non-decision, is there a likelihood that the charges of APA and NUAFC, that there are so many irregularities, is there a likelihood that GCOM can say, well, we cannot make a declaration in these elections?
I'm not a legal person, but that would make absolutely no sense to me. But I want to just say this to you. That is matter with these when they come into the room and they come with this serial number and start to call them off. Actually, I know that observers have asked the GCOM, we want to observe those sticks. And they actually refused us, and they said no. We want to observe the ticks. You're saying that a person that is out of Guyana voted. I don't believe that could ever happen. I don't believe any dead person could be voted, could vote. And so we want, and they told us no. And so I actually believe, though, that the chairperson will make the right decision. I don't believe that whatever will happen after the declaration, and people certainly have the right to take it to court to do a election petition. But at this stage of the game, it's over almost. I mean, by tomorrow, it will be very, very, very clear, and the narrative will change tomorrow afternoon.
Thank you, Nick. In many other countries at this stage, 166 boxes to go. As of this morning would have been, I think it's about 166 or 170 boxes to go. In any other country, a party would have conceded. What's your thoughts, Nick?
So give me a tough question there. I mean, what we need to really look at is, have we seen the best actions coming out of our politicians in this election? Because we've seen some of them coming out. They won the election, was the first narrative. And the elections were free and fair. Then they were ready to be sworn in. Then suddenly there's the issue of the District 4 tabulation. Then there's the whole back and forth of agreeing to a recount, and then having yourself take yourself to court, to see if you should have agreed to the recount or if the recount is legal. Then you get into the recount process. So I would say that we need to look for higher ideals and higher standards in our politicians, because every young person I have talked to, I think across the divide they miss this, and this is the reason you have so many new parties popped up. They didn't all just pop up by chance. They popped up as a referendum or something telling on our politics right now. And every young person I've talked to is turned off by the actions. The only persons I've seen jumping up and down really with this narrative of fraud are those who are hardcore supporters of the party that is yelling that narrative. You would have seen in many other countries a politician concede by now, but we're not there yet. We're not there at that level of political maturity.
Thank you, Leonard. Before I hand our two guests over for your questions, Leonard, I want to put this thought in your mind, Leonard. Nick and Gerry spoke to the robustness of the elections procedures, spoke to the great pass mark that the elections receive from all agencies, 100% of agencies, including the APNU, AFC, and the PPPC. Mr. Ramesh Prasad, as we know, he's a senior member of the private sector observer team as well. He would have opined that the robustness of GCOM was already tested and proved to be true, Leonard. He said that GCOM system produced a correct result. He said that the GCOM is in possession of that correct result. He said fraud was perpetrated, and it is because of GCOM's robust system that the fraud was found out. The fraud was discovered because it was inimical to GCOM's procedures. And he also said now GCOM still has to do the right thing. That is, what is the right thing? Follow your own procedures and get to the right result. I think that was a wonderfully put statement by Ramesh Prasad. Leonard, your thoughts and your questions to our two guests.
You happen to have a way with words, Yog. I want to agree with you there. I think the system is so robust, and let me come back to what Jerry would have said a little earlier. The fact is, even every polling station, and if you do the math, 2339, 2,339 polling stations, multiply by what? Let's say three at the rough figures. You were looking at about 9,000 persons there. Let's say about that, or my maths is off, but it's several thousand. So you're talking about those numbers of persons that you would actually have to bribe. The other thing is, if there are persons within the polling stations from the different parties, and the only ones that we could probably think about that probably would not have representative from all, and I can't think of any, I don't know of any, nobody has come forward and said there wasn't any, are probably the ones in the hinterland areas, and I doubted any such would have existed. What I could tell you is that the small parties would have indicated that they would not have had representatives in all the polling stations. So I want to agree with you that it would have been very difficult. The GCOM, from all indications, had a very robust system, a foolproof system, if you want to say that, and that in itself would have discovered some of the fraud. Having said that, I want to ask this question to both gentlemen: what would you say the percentage of observations made by the coalition versus the opposition and the smaller party? Could we do a guesstimate, hazard a guess at this point in time? Both to you, gentlemen.
Um, as far as the observation from the other parties, I think there were 9 parties that contest these elections. I think the observations from 8 of those parties are maybe 2%.
2% of the total number of
And I don't
observations.
even know, and I don't even know. I think a lot of the observations made was in response to the allegations and observations made by the APNU people. So it was, I mean, this it is negligible.
So you would say it's below 10%.
Hmm.
Absolutely, I would think so.
And
But
I
but but go on,
go,
Leonard.
yes. I want to bring you to the next issue here. There seems to be a lot of questions. What happens at the stage of the declarations? So there is the count. The recount is supposed to be finished. Let's say Sunday, Monday, tabulations around those 2 days. Could GCOM could GCOM refuse not to do a declaration? And I want you to address that. But maybe Nicholas, your understanding, Jerry, your understanding as to the role of the GCOM's chairman. I know we would have been back and forth discussing it, but there seems to be still a lot of questions. I'm receiving a lot of texts, a lot of calls, and say even at this last moment, because of the warden of the order, that maybe we're not out of the woods as yet.
Nicholas, take a first shot at it.
So there is in the wording of the order the issue of the word credible, right? Because that's really what all of this is surrounding. What does the word credible mean? Now, I'm no lawyer by trade. I don't have a law degree, so what I would give you is a best guess, my opinion. Um, I think that the word credible means that you know you're looking for serious and material uh, differences from your SOPs, right? Now I know I kind of went very narrow. Let me come back out broad. Why it relates to the question you asked, which is, you know, issues concerning the order, the declaration, and the role that the chairman plays, right? So the order defines the space in which, or the rules of engagement for the recount. And basically, every other piece of the order is almost mathematical or pedantic, just walk straight ahead. But the issue that everybody has been fighting on, because the rest of the order is just so straightforward, has been the word credible. And and going back to what I just said, is that I think that the word credible is really, is there a material difference in the SORs versus the SOPs? And if there's not a material difference, then clearly the elections were credible. So what that means is that when the when we finish tabulating those results and the elections, the chairman of the CEO of the Elections Commission put together his report. His report then goes to the commission for their deliberation. And I would be surprised if the commission, I would expect obviously those not finding favor with the results are going to try to attack the word, using the word credible as their wiggle room to attack. But I would expect the chair to err on the side of what is right, meaning that the recount was credible and the elections were credible, and therefore a declaration will be made. One thing that was told to me by some lawyers that I had spoken with, both by myself as well as in presence of Captain Gouveia, is that the laws, and I think Anil Nandlal also addressed this when he was one of the interviews he done. There's no scenario in the law that contemplates the election commission not making a declaration.
Correct. And we asked Mr. Vincent Alexander that last night as to whether there is a probability that the Madam Chairman would not make a declaration. And you know, as far as I'm aware, his answer was that in all likelihood, everything being equal, she will have to make a declaration. Gerry, just before you respond to Leonard's question on that same note, let me just say this. Indeed, to our viewers, because I've gotten two texts here, and let me respond. Indeed, viewers and listeners, it is my humble opinion that the word credible is a word that is used to quantitative. It's a qualification. It's a word that is used to describe the worthiness of something, the worthiness of belief, the worthiness whether somebody's evidence is worthy of being believed. So similarly, whether the allegations made from APNU AFC is worthy of being believed by the chairman or by the commission might be the question that we have to ask if we're going to look at all the paradigms of credible or lacking credibility. So, you know, in that stead, Gerry, this whole thing premise or the games that seem to be playing out, that if the elections lack credibility, then chairman cannot call. I wish to put into your face here now, Gerry, that the elections have already been declared to have been credible. The results has to have hard evidence to prove it unworthy of being believed, the entire results, for there to not be a declaration. Gerry?
I agree with you. I think the international community, every international community, all the local observers, we all give these elections very high marks. So these elections, the actual voting day procedures, there was no report of irregularities. And so these elections, the voting day and the count at the polling station and the preparing of the SOPs were all done to very, very high standards. So there's no question about the credibility of these elections. And I think somebody said, I think it was Stalin that said, it didn't matter how you vote, it mattered who did the counting. Like we saw what happened at Region 4 office. And so now that we've gotten to this stage, I think what we are doing here is counting. We are counting the ballots from a credible elections. These elections were very, very credible. It was, and I listened to the European ambassador talk about the high standard. We were doing things in Guyana that is way above the standard he'd ever seen anywhere else in the world. The issue of the ink, the issue of the folio in the polling station. You know, if you, for example, try to vote twice, if you went and vote in the morning and you try to go back to vote in the afternoon, there are three things that will stop you. One, everybody in the room will remember you, right? Unless they have a total memory lapse. Second of all, you have the ink on your finger. And third, the folio in the room that your name is ticked off on. And so if you try to vote for somebody else, can't happen either. Because you go to the polling station, you say your name, they pick up the folio, and the picture they're looking at and you are two different things. So I mean, these elections were very credible, and all we need to do now is finish this count, and I believe the results will be declared, and we will move on. And politicians, I used to say when I was in the military, I want to just say this to Yog and to everybody else, and I spent a lot of time in the military, and when I was in the military, I remember sometimes not remembering that there's a life after this uniform, because my whole life was surrounded by my current environment, and the military really take care of you. They feed you, they house you, they clothe you. And I never gave it thought that it was life after this uniform. But I want to remind politicians, there is a life after these elections. And there's another elections in 2025. And people will remember you. People will remember, because we want to support politicians that really is founded on decency and integrity and honesty. We want to trust our politicians that we support. And people got to remember there's a life after these elections in 2020. And people will remember you.
Correct. And Gerry, Leonard and Nick, let me just share this with viewers and listeners. There is a statement, a joint statement that was released this evening from the Ambassador of the United States of America, Her Excellency Sarah Ann Lynch, the British High Commissioner, His Excellency Greg Quinn, Canadian High Commissioner, Her Excellency Lillian Chatterjee, and the Ambassador of the European Union, His Excellency Fernando Pons Canto. They note in the statement, that the recount process is coming to a conclusion. We congratulate those who have demonstrated an ongoing commitment to ensuring full transparency in the recount process. This includes political parties, staff of the Elections Commission, scrutineers, etc., etc. We also commend the President Granger and the Leader of the Opposition for their support of the recount and for their clear commitment to abide by the results. As the process concludes, it is important for all stakeholders to uphold the integrity of the process and peacefully accept the wishes of the Guyanese population. There will be disappointment for those who have lost. Those who are elected must take on this responsibility with humility and demonstrate that they will govern for the benefit of every Guyanese citizen. The statement goes on for another 2 paragraphs. Gerry and Nick, these elections have shown a lot to the Guyanese people. It's also exposed some persons to the Guyanese people. To both of you gentlemen, I have listened and I have read the acceptance speeches of LFS Burnham, that of Cheddi Jagan, that of Janet Jagan, that of Barry Jagdeo, that of Desmond Hoyt, that of Donald Ramatar, that of David Granger. And they all said, I will be a president of all and for all the peoples. Yet, why is it after 54 years, gentlemen, all the peoples of Guyana remain on totally divided partisan basis? Can we look forward that this will change in your mind as private sector business people? Now take off your hats as observers. As business people, is it a likelihood that we will get this change in our mentality from the politicians anytime soon?
Michelle Obama said it right. She said that power don't change you. Power reveals truly who you are. And she said that power revealed to her through her husband. He was exactly what he was. He was kind, he was a gentleman, and he was a man that didn't allow power to get his head. And so I believe that our leaders, there's an old saying, I think somebody's microphone is on, maybe you might want to mute it, it's coming back at me, but just to say that there's an old saying that we used when I was in the Defense University in Washington. And it says, where you stand depends on where you sit. And a lot of people don't understand that. But you remember when the APNU was in opposition, constitutional reform was a big item on their agenda. So when they sat in the opposition, that constitutional reform was a big item on the agenda. When they got into government, it was no longer. So where you stand on an issue depends on where you sit. So when you sit in opposition, constitutional reform is big. When you sit in government, it is not no longer. And so whoever gets into government now, and to me it's very clear. I mean, it's very clear where this is going. But I would say that we need to hold our politicians' feet to the fire. And as a private sector leader, I am telling you, we in the private sector would always call our governments out. We have done it in the past, and we will continue to do it. And whichever government come into power now, one of the first things I personally want to see is a very strong anti-corruption agency. I would like to see a very strong anti-corruption agency from day one. But where we are going with this oil, we cannot afford to have our country follow the path of many, many small countries in oil. And so I want to take a man like Christopher Ram and make him head an anti-corruption agency in Guyana. And I hope that the government that take over will really come in and really stretch across the divide and find a way to work with the opposition and work with the small parties and find a way to be inclusive as we move forward.
Thank you, Gerry. Nick, your thoughts on this exact point, or as to whether we can heal beyond these elections, because whoever wins or whoever loses these elections, Guyana must not lose. We cannot afford to let the country slide. We got to pick it up. Your thoughts, Nick?
So I think that an interesting comparison I looked at is Trinidad, because Trinidad is a very close neighbor. Trinidad has had oil for 100 plus years, and why I particularly choose them is that their social makeup, more than any other Caribbean island, is closer to us. They have a lot less homogeneity than some of the other Caribbean islands. You know, yes, they have some ethnic tensions, but nothing to the degree that we have. And I suspect that our institutions are the difference, the explainable difference. Our history plus our institutions. And if we want to break the politics out of this race baiting politics, we need to change the institutions so that the parties change how they appeal and who they go after to get votes and how they present a slate of candidates so that you get more and increased diversity. Because it's, as I said, I've spoken to a lot of young people, and this has been a very bitter taste for them, for a lot of those who came of age in the 18 to 26 age demographic. And we need to change this. We need to change and reform the Elections Commission as well. And that's how I think that we will get a change in the environment and to break this cycle. If we do not change those institutions and we don't have that type of reform, I don't see us breaking out of this type of cycle.
But gentlemen, with respect to you both, the many people in the incumbent, many persons of the APNU AFC government have expressed publicly that they believe that the private sector is biased. They believe that the private sector is biased towards the PPP, to be specific. How will the private sector itself work to ensure that those perceptions are erased if they are wrong?
Let me say this to you, Yog, that the private sector in Guyana we would always come down on what we believe is the side of right. And if that side of right happened to be on the side of TCI or the PPP, so be it. And I will tell you, I heard this after the no contents motion, for example, when this thing with 34 came up, and they were trying to get people to buy into this 34 nonsense. And the private sector stood very firmly by what is mathematically correct. And I'm a pilot and I live by mathematics. My life depends on mathematics every day. And there's no way that 1 and 1 can be 2. And when we stood up by what is technically and mathematically correct, and that happened to coincide with the PPP position, you hear that we are PPP. And throughout this exercise, when Mr. Mingo did his fraud and people wanted us to stay silent and we don't stay silent, they said you're a PPP. Well, you know what? We will always come down on what we believe is the side of right. And if it happens to be on the same side of the PPP, don't mean that we are PPP. It means that we are on the side of right. And that is what I will say to you. And I have actually lived through the time, and I will say this here now very strongly. My company was started in 1992, and I will tell you, every day was a better day than yesterday. Investor confidence was at the highest in this country. My company, that never had a government contract, grew from 3 persons to 300 people, um, and it was the environment. It was the environment of investor confidence. And I would say any government that comes in and win investor confidence and it foster and enhance it will get the support of the private sector.
I, you know, I endorse everything Captain said, and I'll add one small example to it. What if I told you in 2011 a mission of the Private Sector Commission with then Chairman Ramesh Duku and Captain Gouveia led a delegation to GCOM to ask for SOPs for the I don't know if they were APNU then or they were PNC then, but for the opposition.
Why don't I tell this story? Let me tell this story quickly. In 2011, when the coalition, when the PUP won, but the coalition it wasn't a coalition at the time, it was APNU, and they were protesting because they said they wanted a copy of GCOM SOPs. And I did not understand then why they wanted it, but we actually led a delegation to GCOM on their behalf, and GCOM agreed eventually and gave us a copy of SOPs on CDs. But more particularly in 2015, we had made a pact with the international community that any one of us heard first the announcement by GCOM who won the elections. We will meet with the person that didn't win and tell them to concede. Coincidentally, the President Donald Ramatara had invited the private sector to come to the office of the president because he was making the allegation that he felt that elections were rigged. And he was talking to us about some of his concerns. And we were in the cabinet room. They had like 10 private sector leaders, and Ramesh Prasad was the chairman of the Private Sector Commission. I was sitting right next to him, and we were talking to President Ramatara with his senior government ministers next to him. And a message came through on the chairman of the Private Sector Commission phone, Ramesh Prasad, and Ramesh Prasad got up without telling any of us anything. And he looked President Ramatara in his face, and he said, "Mr. President, could we please see you in your office?" President Ramatara looked at him at a level of surprise, but he got up and we went to the president's office. All of us followed the president in his office. And the president sat down. The president sat down in his chair, and Ramesh Prasad said to him, "Mr. President, we just got the word from GCOM that David Granger have won the elections, and we are therefore asking you to concede. We are therefore asking you to concede the elections." And President Ramatara rocked back in his chair in shock, and we all turned and walked out the room and left him sitting right there. Because the private sector believe in the rule of law, and in 2015, whatever the PUP felt, we observed those elections. We did not see any irregularities. We stood with the international community. The international community certified those elections, and we stood on the side of the rule of law that the APNU coalition with the AFC had won those elections in 2015, and we called Donald Ramatara out and told him to concede. And so that is the role the private sector plays, and we will continue to do that.
Thank you, Leonard.
Thank you very much, dear gentlemen. I want to ask you two gentlemen, two very powerful members of the private sector in their own right, two big executives. From time to time, you would hear people reaching out and say, "Look, it doesn't matter who wins. One side goes in, another half of the population is not going to be very happy." I want to ask you, as two persons who have a large sway, youth following, would you endorse at this point in time, because of what has happened, how divided our nation is at this point in time, that you may say to the president that is coming in that you should immediately reach across to the divide and bring them on and have some kind of sharing, taking into account the democratic process? I want to say sharing in a very conscious manner of maybe ministerial positions and others because of how divided we are. I want to hear your thoughts on that.
Nick, if I would, these elections in 2015 and 2020, these elections was one of the most professional campaigns I've ever seen by both parties. Nothing about these elections was about race. Nothing. These elections were professionally managed. These campaigns on both big parties. They both campaign on issues, and there was nothing about race. And more particularly, what is important is that both of these parties had an amazing composition of other races. So the APNU, for example, called themselves a big tent, and they had people of all races in that big tent. And even now in the convention center, when you sit there and you're watching the tabulation room, who is doing the count? There are people of all races, and so in the PPP as well. I went to the PPP office there during emancipation, and the whole place was filled with Guyanese of African descent, and so they're Portuguese and they're Amerindians, and so I know that the foreign base of both of these parties are race based, but none of these parties could win these elections if they don't have a large following of other races. And I feel very insulted, for example, when Indians and black people in Guyana alone kind of take ownership of Guyana, because I am a very, very serious player in Guyana, and I don't believe that politics need to be race based, and I haven't seen it in the 2020 elections. And I think we need to stop this thing now. This is about politics. Two political parties went to the polls. They campaign on issues, and the one that the people choose will win. I mean, I'm not saying that they shouldn't reach out to each other. I'm not saying we shouldn't have inclusive governance, but it shouldn't be. We are not South Africa. We have no institutional racism in Guyana. I don't accept that fact. Sorry, Nick. Go ahead.
Let me just interject with this and bring. I want to bring us back to the election. Sorry, I want to bring us back to these elections, gentlemen. Look, Moses Nagamootoo is on record. He holds the portfolio of Prime Minister of this country. He's on record saying that he used the words barefaced fraud. That if the commission is seeing these barefaced fraud, they have no option other than to declare these elections null and void. In other words, he has made a public statement in an interview that he believes that GCOM has no option than to shoot itself probably to death by saying it couldn't run an election and these elections are null and void. I personally find his statements distasteful. He certainly is forgetting the position he's holding in this country, I think. But I wish to say this and before asking you both for your opinion on that. Vincent Alexander, a commissioner of GCOM last night, said you can only annul something that has been declared. Gerry.
No, I agree. I'm surprised. I mean, the Prime Minister, if Moses Nagamootoo said that it was the most barefaced fraud, he's right. There were barefaced fraud in the Region 4 office with Mingo. It was the most transparent, brutal, disrespectful, barefaced fraud that ever happened in front of every streaming cell phone and every international person of the international community and the leaders of the private sector that happened in Region 4. It was barefaced fraud. But I don't see GCOM having any grounds to annul any elections. And I don't know that GCOM got the power to do that. Certainly a court may have it. And I am expecting GCOM to do the right thing. I'm expecting them to finish the count. I'm expecting them to add those numbers up and declare the winner based on those numbers.
Well, Captain, the reason I raised that here, Leonard, is because Moses Nagamootoo said that a night ago. An executive member of ACDA also said that GCOM has three options: declare for PPP, declare for APNU AFC, or not declare. And I'm finding it incredible that that is now a narrative that is being floated out there, because I believe these narratives are creating a dangerous field of expectations within the population. It's like never giving up that you lost means that when you back off and people are, whoever is not citizens of Guyana, they find themselves comfortably seated elsewhere while we hate each other. Nick, I want to come to you with another perspective, and I want to just take your mind because you guys were in that room when Mingo made that infamous declaration. Nick, the issue I have is that many persons on this show and on Elections Watch said, and they keep repeating, that the opposition and the observers, you guys, loud protestations and your lewd behavior is what caused everything. And my question to them, which I'm going to question you now, do you expect a man to be flagrantly in breach of every human degree of decency and everybody in that room must be like sheep and say, yes, sir, yes, sir? Nick, what would be your reaction to those people who are saying that you guys were part of a loud protestation and that's the reason we are where we are?
So let me first answer the first thing we were talking about, the Prime Minister, who's also the chair of the COVID-19 task force. And very simply, I'll answer it. Let's have a hypothetical exercise. If Moses Nagamootoo and the APNU AFC were leading by 15,000 votes, would he be saying that?
Correct. Well, we asked one of them that yesterday. Yeah.
Even though they have all the same situation in the box, just different parties were reversed. Would he be saying that? Now, coming to what you were asking, that was an interesting situation because we were there and we had various observers. Now, here's the fun part about how the private sector observes these elections. The private sector commission was accredited, and it worked with its regional chambers as well as the Georgetown chamber, and we also applied and got our own accreditation. My observer team looks like the Rainbow Coalition. If you lined us up, you would not find one color and one political persuasion, right? How do I know this? Because I had to go back and report when it was my turn and what I saw to people who were APNU AFC supporters, and you had to see the heartbreak in their faces when they kind of felt like these people they held in high ideals, and it's not a gray situation. It's clear as day. You understood and you knew what was going on, and you had live and direct in your face information. You see, the people who can claim the spin are people who were not there and who are being fed a narrative. But these guys were there themselves. We had guys who we had to rush out when the police were putting them out in full riot gear, right? And you had to see the heartbreak in their faces when we brought them together a week later to discuss what we saw, and they just they were shocked. For those of us, it was tough. Now, going to exactly what you were asking, it was a very unique situation because, in all honesty, what I saw was that the observers were actually trying to help Mr. Mingo by being that extra piece of his conscience and trying to do something for him to take a second guess at it, a second stab with his conscience, not to do what he was about to do. Because it was clear as day what he was going to do. And they were trying to be that last, bit of his conscience, that last angel on his shoulder saying, no, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. No, it's not worth it. But something drove him to ignore all of that protestation and do it.
Right. And coming back again to current situation, we got 3 days, 3.5 days, 4 days maximum to go. And it is, I believe every single Guyanese is now looking for an end of this thing and certainly hoping that there will be a
declaration. It's going to be finished on Sunday afternoon.
Yes. So we're all hoping that very soon thereafter, GCOM is going to make a declaration. As we heard, there is and there has been approaches to the courts for whatever it is for the court's intervention in the process. Mr. Commissioner Alexander also expresses an opinion that he thinks that there may be a potential for stakeholders in the process to try to have a court intervention before declaration. Gerry, what would you say to this scenario?
I'm getting to a stage where I guess they could do whatever they want to try and stop what is a legitimate declaration. But you could run from it, but you can't hide from it. The truth will always prevail, and I expect this count to be finished, and I expect GCOM will go through the natural process and due justice, and due process and so on. I believe that a declaration will be had. I mean, they could run people, whoever wants to try to interrupt this process, and we have been having interruptions to our law and order and constitution since 2018, since December 2018 when that no confidence motion was passed. I will tell you, I saw a tremendous amount of maneuverings that I could not believe that we will do that to our country and our economy. And we really should have respected the rule of law and our constitution and followed it. It's the easiest thing to do. So I would want to say that whatever we do in terms of constitutional reform, if we don't have men and women who are ethical, who are honest, who are decent, who live their life with integrity, and who are prepared to live and comply with the rule of law, no constitution will change them. We will always have a problem.
Correct. And Nick, there is another scenario that I want to quickly, we are getting down to program time, I want to quickly put in your mind here. I have said today on our Elections Watch that the politicians in this process, and I'm speaking specifically, and I'm sorry if I hurt anybody, but I'm speaking specifically of the APNO AFC the incumbent. A lot of these guys are behaving like as if they're never going to go to the polls again. And it's amazing. I want to remind all politicians on all sides of the divide, you guys are going to hopefully go to the polls one day again. And I want to also appeal to the Guyanese public. Please build a very, very long memory, especially of those who have stood us in a place where we cannot concentrate on COVID. We're concentrating on elections. We cannot concentrate on the elections, on the education of our children. We're concentrating on politicians. Where it gets so serious that a COVID task force is populated with politicians and not the health professionals like any other country. And that is a sad example of a country that wants to put forward its face as a country that has development as its main aim. These politicians, Nick, all of them from all across the divide, they're going to face the polls again. They're forgetting that the population will remember them next time around. What's your thoughts on this, and what would you say as your parting words to the politicians and their behavior over the next couple of days?
So this is the common ground I found with the youths, and this is the common ground I found with those who are supporters of the government as their party of choice, but not supporting their actions. And it was the belief in democracy, because democracy allows us to hold our leaders accountable. In 2015, when a majority of Guyanese felt that the PPP did not provide the leadership for the country that they wanted, they voted them out. In 2020, when or it's seeming at this point, it's very hard to change the numbers given the amount of boxes left. It's seeming like a majority of Guyanese have said to the APNO AFC, we're not happy with the way you are leading. And that's the beauty about democracy. Democracy takes those people who hide themselves away in ivory towers and thousands of secretaries and security so you can't get to them every day, to have a singular conversation about what's going on in your life, in your city or village, in your community. Well, that's the beauty. That's the one thing that connects all these conversations. What we had was 2,339 mini elections, and we're summing all of those up. And those elections bring all those people and drag them out of that ivory tower and hold them accountable to everybody. From the man, in Region 8, to the man in Region 9, to the woman in Region 10, to the woman in Region 4. Hold them accountable to everybody. And that is why it is important we protect our democracy. We protect our free and fair elections. Because when a government comes in and does not put in the policies we like, we will vote them out.
Correct. Well said. And Leonard, before I go to Captain for his last words, I'm going to give you the last words in the program tonight. Leonard, I'm coming to you first because tomorrow I think you want to continue having the elections watch, Leonard.
I think we should because of the what is happening. People have been calling us, and not only that, we are on to the last lap. So many things people need to be updated. So I think we're gonna come on tomorrow and let us do that. Even for a couple hours, let's see what happens there. But we have to Yog. The people are calling.
So viewers and listeners, the elections watch that would have been weekdays only. Mr. Gildarie is extending that through the compliments, of course, of the entire Kaito News team there, Kaito Radio team, sorry. And tomorrow, look out for Elections Watch at the same time. Is it at the same time, Leonard, 1:30, where the phone lines are going to be open?
1:30.
Wonderful. Now, ladies and gentlemen, across Guyana, I wish to say this to you. It is Room 592, Kaito Radio. It is our fervent hope that we all, if we have never used our thinking power and we were all loyalists to the politicians for these past 90 days, henceforth, for the next week, I'm begging everyone, think for yourself. Let us turn off our TVs, turn off our connections to the politicians, and let us think for ourselves as to what we want this country to be. This country can be the greatest country in this world because of the wealth we have coming to us. As it is a bankrupt country. Bankrupt morally and bankrupt financially. It is the people of this country that can force the politicians to have the decency of putting their moral compass right back where it belongs, in their hearts and in their souls and in the soul of Guyana. It's up to you and I, citizens of this country, to remind the president he is the chief public servant. He is there to serve us. We are not here to serve them. Unless we, the people of this country, can get together and don't allow race and politics to divide us, unless we realize that we must hold the politicians on a short leash, brothers and sisters, they will continue to ride us and hold us on a short leash. Whether governments change every 5 years or not is not as important as the life that we can hand to our children and grandchildren. And therefore, morality and steadfastness must become the watchword of this country if we are to have a future for our children. Captain, I hand you the last words before we close this program tonight, to ask for what message you will have as a private sector observer, as a man who has been passionately involved in this process. What are you saying to the Guyanese people as we're looking down these last 4 days of this elections?
Peace. In 1992, I saw an election that was the first fair and free elections in decades in Guyana. And I saw massive violence on the streets of Georgetown. And I'm saying, I hope that we have no leader that would encourage that again. I am saying that we need our leaders to accept our results, to accept what they've agreed on, and that we should move forward in peace. And we should, and if we really want to find a way to work together, we have to do that without without getting hostile to each other. And I think the ABC ambassador said there will be winners and there will be losers, and we hope that the winners will take it with a level of humbleness and they'll reach across the divide. Certainly, the private sector will advocate. We will advocate for reaching across the divide and finding a way to work with all of us, with all of Guyanese. And finally, I want to urge Guyanese brothers and sisters: do not allow anyone, do not allow any misguided person to encourage you to break the law, to break the peace. What has happened was a lawful process, and let us live by those results. We have an economy to build. We have our children to create a future for them. We have people to put back to work. We have this oil that is going to bring enormous revenues to our country. Let's enjoy it together, and don't let politicians mislead us.
Thank you, Gerry. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a critical 3.5 to 4 days ahead of us. Well, put it this way, we have probably another week, because GCOM will it has to go through its procedures and has to take its time, do its assessment to ensure it makes a declaration. The entire country's future is dependent on one person only. One person only. Regardless of what the politicians say, regardless of whether Gerry and Nicholas, our guest for tonight, agrees with me, regardless of Culture News or Culture Radio, there is one person in this country that has the future in this country in her hands. And that's Madam Justice Claudette Singh. Madam Justice Claudette Singh, I, a citizen of Guyana, I say to you tonight, Madam, this entire country has been very patient. Kudos to the men and women in this country that while we have traded verbiage, it remained verbiage. Madam Chief Justice, there is a lot of respect for you and your legal acumen and your ability to do what we know will be the right thing. Our children's future rests in your hands, Madam Chief Justice. Madam Justice Claudette Singh. Our children's future and the future of this country that our foreparents were slaves and servants in rest in your hand, Madam Justice Claudette Singh. And certainly the decisions you will be making over the next week are critical. And Madam Justice Claudette Singh, I, on behalf of all of the men and women and children of this country, I pray for your good health. I pray for God's light to always be over you, Madam Justice Claudette Singh. For God to be with you, to protect you, to hold you close to Him, to hold your hands, to hold your heart, to keep you strong, because the next week we know this country rests in your hand, Madam Justice Claudette Singh. Ladies and gentlemen, as we say goodnight from room 592, I remind you all, the future of this country and our ability to continue to hand the country over to our children also rests in your hands and my hands. Peace, love, goodwill has to be the watchword. I beg you, heed not the Kool-Aids. Heed not the words of opportunists. Heed to your conscience. Heed to your God. Ladies and gentlemen, I bid you a good night and a great weekend from room 592. As I say thanks to Nicholas and Gerry for joining us, and of course, my co-host, Mr. Leonard Gildarie. I also wish to say thanks to Kevin Smith, Joshua Van Slytman, and the entire Culture Radio team, Culture News team, and to Mr. Glenn Lal for allowing us to do this, bring this program to you free of cost every night. Room 592 returns on Monday, but ladies and gentlemen, Elections Watch continues tomorrow at 1:30. If you can, I beg you, say a prayer tonight for our country and Chairman Claudette Singh. Ladies and gentlemen, good night. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.